Just start here by saying a little bit about legacy and vision. And the reason why I wanted to start with legacy and vision is, in getting ready to come and meet with all of you today, I took some time, of course, to go through your website and find out a little bit more about the history of your organization, the kinds of things that you're involved in today, but the things that you've done throughout your history. And I thought about, for myself, just the idea in terms of legacy. Now that seemed to be the wrong way, but I just turned it on. About legacy, I'm thinking about 54 individuals who had a common bond with the environment, perhaps through angling, perhaps through some other activities. 54 individuals who got together so long ago and said, we have something precious here that we want our children to have, and we want future generations to have. And just being in this room among all of you, thinking about 54 people who had an idea, and what that, so long ago, and what that idea has turned into today, and the legacy that you carry on, but the vision of those individuals to say, we could do something really important. We should do something really important. And so for me, it's just tremendously striking to think about that and what that small number of people was able to accomplish. Truly extraordinary. And then a little earlier this morning, I had a chance to sit in as you were, I think, sharing ideas about the future. What are the really important things for your organization to carry forward in your individual chapters and nationally? And whether that be outreach to the public and to youth and trying to bring more youth into the movement that you've created, or whether it's stream monitoring, some kind of clean water action plan, or whether it's other issues that you want to pursue. The legacy continues in the conversation. I was just very struck thinking about how 54 has turned into more than 40,000, and how you here gathered in the room are thinking about what's the future and how do we continue the important work that your organization has done. So I find it very striking. And you all know the member pledge, I'm sure. Everyone has memorized the member pledge, is that right? But as I read through, to strive for the purity of water, the clarity of air, and the stewardship of the land and its resources, to know the beauty and understanding of nature, and the value of wildlife, woodlands, and open space, to the preservation of this heritage, and man sharing in it. An extraordinary pledge, and something as someone who's worked at the Environmental Protection Agency, now really for almost all of my career, really rings true to me as a very inspiring pledge for your members to participate in. So I wanted to start by acknowledging the legacy and the vision that you all have brought to this endeavor that you pursued, and how important it is in all of your communities, how important it is for the nation, how important it is for the work that we're trying to pursue in the Environmental Protection Agency as well, to have organizations like yours out there pushing and leading and asking the hard questions and pushing issues forward that really need to get the light of day. So I greatly appreciate the work that every one of you does in this regard. So that's where I wanted to start. And then I wanted to perhaps step back a little bit and give you a sense of what has brought me to the work that I do. So this is a screenshot, and I hope all of you in the corner, maybe hard for you to see, I recognize. This is a screenshot of the cityscape of Cleveland, Ohio, where I grew up. I grew up in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, so I made sure to stop by the Ohio section last night. That was my first stop in my tour. And so this is Cleveland, Ohio in the 1960s. It looks different now for a couple of reasons. There are some different buildings there that were there. What you see on the right, that pointy tower on the right side, is the Terminal Tower, which was kind of the iconic gem of the Cleveland skyline when you could actually see it. And that's really an important part of this, point of this photograph. This is what it often looked like growing up, that brown haze in Cleveland. Now, Cleveland, of course, was famous for a bunch of reasons throughout the 1960s, and the one that I suspect that many of you would probably identify first was a particular fire that occurred in Cleveland on the Cuyahoga River. Now, that fire occurred in what year? 1969. Now, I would have shown you a photograph of the 1969 fire, but there really isn't a good record of the 1969 fire. In terms of the history of fires on the Cuyahoga, it was considered a relatively minor event of the 1969 fire. This is the 1952 fire. And I thought, well, I could have shown you this picture of a fire from the 40s, but I thought this 1952 fire was a little bit more spectacular in terms of the way that it shows on the screen. So why do I make this point? That many people today, many young people today, and many adults today will say, my God, the 1969 fire on the Cuyahoga River really was a wake-up call to the nation. Well, it may have been a wake-up call to the nation in addition to many other things that were going on, including things that you all and your predecessors in the organization were bringing to the forefront of people's awareness. But Cuyahoga River burned a dozen times over 100 years. People don't remember that, they're not aware of that. Cuyahoga River was choked and a dead river for decades before the 1969 fire. It's not something that just happened one day. It was really a legacy of the industrial history of the nation, which was tremendously important for the vitality of our nation, and at the same time came at a tremendous cost. And we have made incredible progress since this time, working together, but certainly I think it's an important part of our legacy to be aware of. And as I said, many people don't appreciate just how bad things were and for how long they were a challenge. So this next photograph is not, I will acknowledge, this is not of the same site on the Cuyahoga River. It's not what it looks like downtown, but the fact is that there is life at the Cuyahoga River today as a result both of the laws that we passed over 40 years ago, especially the Clean Water Act and the work that was done, but also the work of concerned citizens, local citizens who demanded change in terms of the way the environment in and around the river was being managed. So again, tremendous credit to all of you. So another thing I think that's important to keep in mind in terms of drinking water. I'm going to talk mostly about drinking water today, because that's the primary responsibility I have in my role at EPA is for drinking water, national drinking water regulations. But it is tremendously important for me that you all are aware how important the work you do every day is for protecting drinking water. If you're out there monitoring streams, if you're characterizing the health of streams, if you're looking for macroinvertebrates, if you're making sure that water bodies are fishable and swimmable, you're making a very important contribution to source water protection for drinking water. And I'm not sure that the public broadly appreciates how important that connection is. So our drinking water regulations, by and large, talk about what has to happen at the drinking water treatment plant, right? What has to happen at the drinking water treatment plant. The concentration of various constituents that are permitted in drinking water as they leave the drinking water treatment facility and enter the distribution system, the series of pipes that takes them to people's homes. We don't say very much in the Safe Drinking Water Act about what has to happen upstream of the drinking water treatment plant. But I think you all know that what does happen upstream of the drinking water treatment plant is tremendously important in terms of what is going to go into the distribution system and the challenge that drinking water treatment professionals are faced with in terms of trying to manage various source water contaminants. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of those issues. Before I do that, I do want to acknowledge, Scott, thank you for acknowledging also how much progress we have made. And so if you look back to the time when I was born in 1961, in 1962, we had in the United States of America 28 drinking water standards. 28 drinking water standards for the United States of America. In 1962, about 40% of drinking water treatment facilities failed to meet those 28 standards, failed to meet all of them. Today we have more than 90 drinking water standards, and on any given year, more than 91% of the drinking water treatment facilities in the United States meet all of those standards every day of the year. A tremendous amount of progress, tremendous gains in terms of safety of drinking water. And drinking water, without question, is a public health protection program. If you think back to the turn of the century, and you turn to not the 2000s, but the 1900s, you know, some of the greatest public health concerns in the nation related to typhoid. Typhoid was primarily delivered by drinking water to the population. It was when we started to disinfect drinking water that we started to make gains in terms of typhoid. You see tremendous public health advancements that occurred, not just as a result of medical care, but also as a result of treatment of drinking water. And so if you've been watching the news, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the town called Flint, Michigan. How many of you were familiar with a town called Flint, Michigan before, say, a year ago? So a number of you. But there are a lot more people who are talking about Flint, Michigan today than were talking about Flint, Michigan a year or two ago. And I'm going to talk some about Flint. I know that's an issue that's on people's minds that's really important for us to talk about. So it's not only, you know, I showed before and after pictures of the Cuyahoga River in terms of the fires on the Cuyahoga River, and then the picture upstream of where the fires occur today, how much improvement there is. It's not just a matter of improvement of water quality across the country that you've helped to achieve, it's also preservation of water quality. This is a picture of the Columbia River Gorge, and there are some challenges in the Columbia River Gorge, as I think you're all aware. But it was a beautiful river. It remains a beautiful river for populations to enjoy. This is a picture of Rockport Harbor in Massachusetts, where my family is often vacationed, near my kids' grandparents. And it was beautiful, and it remains beautiful as a result of the work that you do. And then there are other places where there's really been some pretty significant improvements in terms of choked streams that are much cleaner today than they were. Part of what I think the experience in Flint, Michigan and other places has helped to demonstrate is that for much of the American people, I think they don't appreciate how central a role drinking water plays in everything that happens in the community, everything that goes on, whether it's drinking water in a school that allows schools to be open, whether it's businesses, restaurants, whether it's our homes. Drinking water plays a central role in almost everything that happens in the community. And drinking water tends to be, historically, taken for granted. Where does drinking water come from? It comes from the tap. You turn on the faucet, that's where drinking water comes from. And you can drink it all the time because it's safe almost everywhere in the country all the time. And a lot of people don't appreciate what goes into making drinking water safe. And oftentimes they don't appreciate that until they lose access to that drinking water. And then suddenly it's like, what happened? What do you mean you're closing the schools? What do you mean the restaurants are closed? What do you mean businesses shut down? So I'm going to talk about a few events that occurred in the year 2014. 2014 was an important year for the drinking water program, in part because 2014 was the 40th anniversary of the Safe Drinking Water Act, a chance to take stock at the great accomplishments we've made over the last 40 years. But there are a number of other things that happened in 2014 that are pretty important to pay attention to as well. So this is a picture. Is anybody from West Virginia here? All right, we from West Virginia. This is a picture of the Elk River. The Elk River just upstream from Charleston, West Virginia. In January of 2014, Charleston made the front page of the national news in a way that cities typically don't want to make the front page of the national news. And people remember what happened in Charleston, in the Elk River? So there was a facility called Freedom Industries. Freedom Industries was a coal washing facility with tanks right on the bank of the Elk River. Doesn't it look like if something came out of one of those tanks, where does it look like it would go? Right? They had virtually no secondary containment at the Freedom Industries site. Freedom Industries site happened to be located about a mile upstream of the West Virginia American Water Intake, which is the intake and treatment plant that serves the population of Charleston, West Virginia. So what happened was there was a leak in one of these tanks, and it went right in the intake a mile downstream. And how did the operators of the West Virginia American Water Treatment Plant for Charleston, how did they find out that they had a problem? Anybody? They smelled. They smelled something. It smelled like licorice. In fact, the whole treatment plant smelled like licorice. And before long, people's homes smelled like licorice. Parts downtown smelled like licorice. What the heck is going on? It was a compound, which is, the acronym is MCHM, a compound that was relatively unknown that was used at the Freedom Industry site to wash, it was a coal washing facility. And it was a compound very little was known about in terms of toxicity. But what do we do now? Says West Virginia American Water, working with the state of West Virginia, working with the federal EPA. What do we do now? We don't know what's in the water, but we surely know something is there. So in relatively short order, we pulled all the information we could from the Centers for Disease Control, trying to find out what we could from Freedom Industries. Ultimately, there were some private chemical companies that had a little bit of data on MCHM, which allowed the CDC to set a level which they considered to be safe. Well, the concentration of MCHM was well above that level for 5 days in Charleston, West Virginia. You didn't know much about the toxicity, but you knew it wasn't good. So what did West Virginia American Water tell the people in Charleston that they should not do? They shouldn't drink the water, they shouldn't bathe in the water, they shouldn't use the water for anything except flushing toilets. And keep in mind, in Charleston, West Virginia, in the dead of winter, in January, there are a lot of people who have to run their water all day long to keep their pipes from freezing. All throughout the community, homes smelled like licorice. As it turned out, there's one bit of good fortune, perhaps, in this story. As it turned out, this compound, MCHM, is a compound that has a very low odor threshold, meaning you can smell it at very low concentrations, and a relatively higher toxicity number, meaning you could smell it when it was at a safe level. So that was an early warning for the community that they had a problem, and they were able to react quickly. However, think about, as any one of you telling your children or your grandchildren, once the levels got below the safe level that CDC identified, telling them, I know it tastes like licorice, but it's okay to drink. No one can say that, right? It took months for that community to recover from this experience. And this spill ended up costing the state of West Virginia, Governor Tomlin estimated the cost to the state of West Virginia was $70 million for a 5-day event where they had to tell people you can't use your water for anything, drinking, bathing. You have to come and pick it up. Deploy the National Guard, and look at the people in this line. These are not people we necessarily expect to be driving up in limousines, right? To have somebody fill their water. You see people who've got, like the woman there who's got, maybe she went to Target or maybe she went to Home Depot, she's got this great big bin. She's going to fill, water's 8 pounds a gallon. She said, how the heck is she going to deal with this? And where has that bin been? Where's that bin been? So, just the challenge for the community going through this very traumatic event. And it is not as if, I can assure you, it is not as if the day that the levels were safe, everyone was like, okay, I'm fine now. The impact on people's confidence about the safety of their drinking water remains today in Charleston. Remains today. People wondering, is it safe for me to drink? And that's not a critique of West Virginia American Water. West Virginia American Water had no backup, they had no alternative source. They had that single intake. They didn't have days of storage somewhere that they could tap. They did what they had to do. And just imagine what would have happened if some people would say, well, why don't you just shut off the water? Shut off the intake. What happens if you shut off an intake for a community? No water in the system. No pressure, so the entire system becomes at risk of contamination. No ability to flush toilets for 300,000 people. Imagine the health risk associated with that. No ability to fight fires. Right? It's not like you can just shut off a system. Now, the city of Cincinnati was in a very different boat. They're downstream. There was a lot of dilution that happened in the Ohio River before it reached Cincinnati, but Cincinnati also has several days of backup. They had lots of warning that this was coming. They sampled for MCHM near the intake at Cincinnati. They knew when it was going to come down, and they were able to use their backup storage for a day as the chemical went by. Now, when it got to their community, it was much diluted. It wasn't the same kind of issue that they had in Charleston. But for people in Charleston, there was really not much alternative. This is fundamentally a source water protection issue. That's what happened here. There are 70,000 chemicals in commerce, more than 70,000 chemicals in commerce in the United States. A drinking water treatment facility cannot be built and maintained to treat for every one of those chemicals all the time, right? So a tremendous challenge for the people in West Virginia. So here's another photograph from 2014. This is from August 2014. And some of you who are familiar with the Great Lakes might recognize this as the western end of Lake Erie. What big city is located near the western end of Lake Erie? Toledo, Ohio. So this is a photograph, and I apologize, I don't recall whether this is from NASA or NOAA. It's a satellite photograph of the algal bloom in western Lake Erie that in August, the first weekend of August, settled in right around and really right on top of the drinking water intake for Toledo, Ohio, which is located well off the shore of Lake Erie. That's what the water looked like at the drinking water intake. That's the water that was going into the intake in Toledo. So, now some of you might say, you know, there's some health food stores that I can go to in town and they make a drink, it's drink like that. It's not the same drink. Right? This is what Toledo was faced with in terms of trying to turn that into something that the population could safely drink. This was on a Friday night when this all started to play out in earnest. And I had the opportunity to participate in some teleconferences that were different from most other teleconferences I've participated in. You know, when it's Sunday morning about 12:30 in the morning and you're on a call with the mayor of Toledo and the governor of Ohio saying, what are the latest sampling results and what do we think it means and what can we tell the population in the morning, that's a pretty intense conversation. But that's what happened over the course of the weekend. Similar to Charleston, West Virginia, what did the governor do? The governor declared a state of emergency, mobilized the National Guard. People lined up in long lines now, the 1st of August in the summer heat, to get water for them to drink. Now, it was a little bit different than Charleston in the sense that the concern was not with bathing in Toledo, so there were more uses of the water that were safe for the population there, but they were told they couldn't drink the water. It was the mayor who issued an advisory, the governor backed the mayor up. And we worked in support of them through the course of that weekend. But 2 days in the beginning of August, when the citizens of Toledo were told they couldn't drink the water because of microcystin. Microcystin is related to harmful algal blooms and is actually quite a toxic compound. What EPA did after the Toledo event, we had been working for some time on a health advisory for microcystin, spermopsin, another algal toxin. We issued those before the next algal bloom season. We issued those in the summer, actually in the spring of 2015, to help folks to prepare for what might happen next. Last year, I would say, in 2015, I would say that we were both very lucky and we were also very well prepared for the next algal bloom season because we had an algal bloom on the Ohio River, as many of you probably know, that extended hundreds of miles, impacted 30 drinking water facilities, not one of which issued a don't drink advisory because they were well prepared. They were doing the sampling they had to do. A number of them got more activated carbon to remove microcystin from their drinking water supplies, and they would provide safe drinking water for their population through the course of this event. Hundreds of miles on the Ohio River. Last year, there was a larger algal bloom on Lake Erie than there was the previous year. But it didn't happen to settle over the intake for Toledo. That's the part where I say we were very lucky. So who knows what happens next in terms of algal toxins? We think the nation's drinking water systems are better prepared. Algal blooms are fundamentally a source water protection issue. The biggest contributor, as I'm aware, to algal blooms is nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen, right? And then we also see some indication algal blooms happen when the temperatures are warm. The temperatures are getting warmer all across the country. And so we see some connection with climate events and algal blooms as well. So another very significant challenge that we've been working through. And then you've probably heard about Lake Okeechobee in Florida recently, where the state's declared a state of emergency for Lake Okeechobee, also impacting drinking water facilities in Florida, none of whom have been overwhelmed by the algal toxins, but many who have been challenged by the algal toxins. This is a source water protection issue. The work that you do is tremendously important in helping to address these issues nationally. So, one of the things that we have done recently to try and help to connect the work that groups like you do with the drinking water program is develop a tool which we call the drinking water mapping application. It basically is a tool that allows the public to log on and understand better what the sources are for their drinking water, especially if they have it. It addresses both groundwater systems and surface water systems. What the sources of their drinking water, where their drinking water comes from, and what's going on in the watershed. So it's a searchable GIS-based database that will allow them to identify the community that they're interested in, saying, you know, I want to understand who supplies my drinking water, is the source polluted, and how can I get involved in protecting those sources of drinking water. So just to give you a little bit of a tour, you know, it's a map-based application. So basically people can identify where they live and what drinking water source they're particularly concerned about. They can identify through that site all organizations like yours and many others who are working in the watershed, who have activities ongoing that they might want to get involved in. This might be a tool. You were talking about outreach to communities, reach out to people who maybe are not so aware of the great work that you're doing. I'm quite sure your organization is listed on the website as one that's doing activities in the watershed. And then it will also allow people to search to find things like what are the regulated wastewater treatment plants upstream of their intake, what's the predominant land use, how much of it is farm use, how much of it is forest land. Helps them understand what kind of issues might contribute to source water challenges within their community. So one of the communities that you could log on to using this DW map site is in the state of Michigan, about 70 miles from Detroit. And that's Flint, Michigan. And I want to talk a little bit about Flint because I think every one of you, I'm quite confident, has heard a great deal about Flint. And I think we're at an unprecedented time in the drinking water program, and that I think there has been no event that has galvanized the public attention on drinking water safety like Flint has. So Flint, the reason why I talk about 2014, the genesis of the drinking water challenges in Flint really date back to April of 2014 when a decision was made to switch from Detroit water. Flint was a purchasing system. They bought their water from the city of Detroit where it was treated, put into a 70-mile-long pipeline where it traveled to Flint and went into the distribution system in Flint. They decided, under the authority of the state governor-appointed emergency manager who had complete authority over this decision, they decided essentially to save money and as a bridge to a new treatment system that I'll get into that they were going to be moving to. They decided to switch their source from purchasing Detroit water to treating Flint River water. The Flint River is not one of those pure rivers that you want to imagine. You know, it's a quite polluted river. It has corrosive waters, and the Flint treatment plant had operated barely, not at all, over the course of decades, because Flint was a long-term purchaser of water from Detroit. They had a treatment plant in Flint that was an emergency backup. It was designed to draw from the Flint River in the case that they lost access to Detroit water. But this was a decision to be a bridge from the time when they went from Detroit to a new water authority called the Carrignandi Water Authority. It's a regional water authority where the city of Flint had planned to get water from Lake Huron, bring it to Flint through a pipeline, treat it in the treatment plant in Flint, and distribute it to the city. So you've heard a lot, I'm sure, about lead in the city of Flint and lead in drinking water in Flint. How many people live close to Flint? Anybody? So one of the things that's really resonated for me about the story of Flint goes back to the pictures I showed you of Cleveland, Ohio. So one of the predominant themes growing up in Cleveland, Ohio was population loss. You know, Cleveland was a pillar of the Industrial Revolution in America. It was one of America's most vibrant and successful cities 100 years ago. Had tremendous amount of auto production, steel production, so many other industries. And then throughout the time that I was growing up, Cleveland steadily lost population. One of the headlines every year would be how many fewer people live in Cleveland than did the year before. It's part of the Rust Belt, right? The Rust Belt. All those shuttered factories, people who lost jobs. That happened all through the industrial Midwest, and there's no place that's more centrally located in the Rust Belt than Flint, Michigan. So Flint, Michigan, when I was born, Flint, Michigan had a population a little over 200,000 people. The population of Flint, Michigan today is a little less than 100,000. Imagine what happens economically to a city when half of the population leaves. And why do they leave? Because they lost their jobs. There's some 70,000 jobs in Flint that were lost over a series of decades. Flint is among the poorest cities in the United States. The median household income is something like $22,000, $23,000 a year for a family of 4. They have 40% more of their population living in poverty, and they're among the most violent cities in the United States, among the highest violent crime rates. So Flint has a tremendous challenge, far beyond drinking water. But let's talk about drinking water for a minute. So what happens when you have a drinking water system that's built to serve 200,000 people that now only serves 100,000? You have a whole lot of pipes that go to homes that are vacant and factories that are vacant. And water's not flowing through those pipes. It's sitting there stagnant. And a number of those pipes are going to be old and corroded like these pipes. The middle one is a corroded service line. The left is a lead service line, which you probably have heard a lot about recently. And the right one is a lead service line that has an orthophosphate protected coating on it. So a lot of what happened in Flint, most of what happened in Flint, related to the distribution system. A series of pipes that take the water from the treatment plant to people's homes. Shortly after they made the switch to the Flint River, first they had a problem with E. coli, bacteria detected in the distribution system. That's a bad thing. That's an indicator that people can get sick and can get sick in a hurry. How do you deal with bacteria in the distribution system? Well, we disinfect distribution systems in the United States, typically with chlorine. So Flint boosted their chlorine, and then they failed the disinfection byproducts rule because they seesawed and went too high in their chlorine to try and deal with the E. coli. And then challenges related to lead started to emerge. And understand that it's the case that almost nowhere in the United States do you find lead at high concentrations in the source water. Lead in drinking water is not coming from the source water. It's coming from the pipes that the treated water travels through, both within the distribution system and in people's homes. There are approximately 10 million lead service lines in place in the United States today. Approximately 10 million lead service line. The service line is the part of the line that runs from a water main under the middle of a street to the house. Typically, half of a service line is owned by the community and half is owned by a private homeowner. Approximately 10 million lead service lines still in place today. So water is traveling through what's essentially pure lead before it gets to the tap. That's the challenge that Flint was facing. And what Flint did that created the biggest problem was, in addition to switching to a corrosive source, they discontinued their corrosion control. In many systems, every large system in the United States is required to manage the corrosivity of their drinking water to prevent leaching of lead and copper as the water passes through the distribution system. Flint stopped doing that in 2014 when they switched to the Flint River. And so the stories that you've heard today over the last 6-8 months are all about Flint, all about lead in drinking water because of the corrosion of the system. So it's a pretty significant challenge that Flint has faced, and we have been actively involved in Flint for many months, trying to recover the integrity of the system, trying to reestablish corrosion control in the system. And I think you know that the population in Flint has been receiving bottled water or filters to filter their water over the past 7 or 8 months. 2014, so I talked about Toledo, where they were told they couldn't drink their water for 2 days. Charleston, where they were told they couldn't drink their water for 5 days. And Flint, Michigan, where they've been told that they couldn't drink their water now for upwards of 7 months. So an extraordinary challenge. Flint is unique. The drinking water across the United States is among the best drinking water in all the world. Flint is unique, but it is important to understand that the conditions that allowed Flint to happen, which were an oversized drinking water system, a community that had very limited resources and very limited capacity to manage their drinking water plant, a corrosive source, and many lead service lines, those conditions are present in other places in the country, which points to how important it is for us to stay vigilant on these issues, to make sure that we're able to make the kinds of investments we need to make, both to have the capacity we need in drinking water treatment plants to manage these issues, and also to be able to rebuild our infrastructure across the country. So we estimate at EPA, I run what we call the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund, which is a very significant source of infrastructure funding for communities. It's capitalized at about $1 billion a year, and it goes out and provides low-interest loans to communities all across the United States for infrastructure investments. We estimate that over the next 20 years, the need for infrastructure replacement in the United States for drinking water is about $385 billion. That's a big number, 385 with a B. The amount of pipe that we estimate that's required to be replaced in the United States, based on the current pipe replacement rate, which I'll come back to in just a second. The amount of pipe over the next 20 years we estimate in our needs survey that needs to be replaced for drinking water would circle the globe 6 times at the equator. That's a lot of pipe. How do we come up with that assumption of how much pipe needs to be replaced? We base that on the current, plug in or find another power source. We base that on the current rate of pipe replacement in the United States, which is approximately 0.5% per year. 0.5% per year. So if you replace 0.5% per year, how long is a pipe that you put in the ground going to have to last before you come back and replace it? 200 years. There are 200-year-old pipes in service in the United States, but not many of them. And that's not really what we want to be going for. So part of that message is the need for infrastructure investment. You've heard that story around bridges and roads. It's certainly the case in the hidden infrastructure of drinking water. So a big challenge for the nation. But I do want to make sure that it's clear to me that in terms of the experience in Toledo and in Charleston and Flint, all 3 of those events, particularly Toledo and Charleston, have a very important component of source water protection. In the work that you do every day across the country, is key to helping communities all across the U.S. be successful in providing safe drinking water to their population. Now, when I worked in the Superfund program many years ago, the Toxic Waste Cleanup Program, and I worked in, that was when I worked for the EPA in New York and New Jersey. And New York and New Jersey in the 1980s was a great place to work at Superfund. There were 100 Superfund sites in the state of New Jersey. We were just hammering away. A lot of work to do. It was very exciting. But I remember back then that when we worked on remedies for Superfund sites, and I worked primarily on the public health risk side, we would talk about threats to kids, and we would talk about threats to ecological receptors. And in almost every one of those conversations, they would drive the ecologists nuts, because in almost every one, you won't be surprised that people really wanted to focus on what are the threats to kids. You know, they didn't want to talk so much about the ecology. It was like the public health always carried the day. And I know that many of you have probably had the experience of working for years to protect a stream and sometimes having a hard time getting attention on those issues because there's never enough resources to go around. It might not be fair. It might not be fair. It might not be appropriate that in terms of the way, the issues that get people's attention, drinking water gets people's attention. It gets people's attention. And I think part of what we have seen, as I mentioned, it's really striking that it's a resource that people tend to take for granted until something goes wrong, until they lose it. And things can happen very quickly where things can go wrong, like they did in Toledo and Charleston. That was, in both instances, you know, one day you could drink the water, the next day you couldn't. That gets people's attention. And so one of the things I do want to say is that in terms of the work that you do, number one, source water protection is tremendously important for drinking water. The second thing, the public has really taken a lot of attention to drinking water right now. And I think the connections between the work that you do and protecting drinking water are a great opportunity for you to be able to talk about why it matters so much to protect streams and rivers, lakes all across the United States. And so I'm just pointing out that I think it's an opportunity to draw greater attention to the work that you do, not just because your work's important for protecting drinking water, but when you are protecting rivers and streams and making sure that they're fishable and they're swimmable and that they're safe for aquatic life, you are by definition protecting the drinking water use in almost every case. And so it's just an important, I think, opportunity for people to connect with the significance of the work that you do. Another set of issues that are challenging communities across the United States, and both on the ecological side and the public health side, are extreme weather and climate change events. So I've got some slides here from Hurricane Sandy. The one on the right is on Martha's Vineyard in Oak Bluffs, Massachusetts, with the storm surge going right over the road, which is typically not underwater. And then you also see pictures of Breezy Point in the bottom left. Breezy Point is a community in Queens, maybe many of you remember, where there was the tremendous storm surge and then a fire that started at Breezy Point, destroyed about 200 homes. What a remarkable, bizarre, tragic thing to see a fire burning in the midst of this storm surge, a fire burning in the midst of this tremendous rain and the flooding. But that's what occurred there. And we have seen from Katrina, we've seen from Sandy, we've seen inland, these remarkable events that have occurred with increasing frequency of flooding events where you hear about 100-year storms or 500-year storms that in some cases are happening every couple of years. Right? I think many of you have probably experienced that and seen the damage that can happen to the ecological integrity of streams and rivers as a result of that tremendous flow that can come through. One of the events that was really striking to me was in Boulder, Colorado in 2013. Anybody from Boulder here? Anybody from Colorado here? Nobody? Right? Got one from All right, so you may remember, what a strange thing. In Boulder, they were in the midst of a drought in the fall of 2013, a long-term drought. And then they had a 1,000-year storm event in the middle of the drought. Wiped out many homes, wiped out all kinds of drinking water, wastewater treatment facilities, just wiped out roads, bridges, all the strangest thing. And then they went back to their drought. It's not as if a great big rain event fixes a drought, right? Think about what happened in Houston in the course of about a year and a half ago. Texas, you remember, they were in the grips of this long-term drought. Next thing you know, you saw cars floating down the highway in Houston. It's like the challenges for drinking water, the challenges for protecting the integrity, ecological integrity of ecosystems, so difficult in the midst of these severe weather events. And then just in terms of drought, you know, these pictures, not unusual for the western United States now, where you see communities that are losing their water supply. One of the themes that I heard talked about a fair amount last night as I was going from room to room was depletion of groundwater resources, overuse of groundwater, and also pollution of groundwater with nitrates and other pollutants. And I understand that there are many of you who are challenged with some of those issues in your communities. Certainly in the West, this is playing out in an extraordinary way. And in the drinking water program, I do not regulate water quantity. I do not have the authority to regulate water quantity. But I think everyone would agree it is very difficult for a community to supply safe drinking water if they have no water. Right? Water quantity matters, extreme events matter, and they make it much more difficult to provide safe drinking water as supplies become more limited. Those are some of the challenges that we're faced with right now in the nation's drinking water program. I don't want to leave you with the idea that, oh my gosh, this sounds like a horrible disaster. The fact remains that drinking water in the United States is among the safest of any country in the world. I see glasses full, actually many of them empty here around your tables. You must have some confidence that you can drink drinking water safely in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, which you can. And it's true in most communities across the country. We have made tremendous progress in this country, but we need to stay focused on these issues. And there are tremendous connections between the work that you do every day, even if you're not thinking about the drinking water source, even if you're thinking about protecting the ecological integrity of the water resources in your communities, there is a tremendous connection, an important connection between the work you do every day and protecting families all across the United States in terms of their drinking water. So one of the things that I would like to do is to continue to find ways to reach out to all of you, to support the work you do, to praise the work you do, and see how we can continue to work together for the benefit of communities all across the country. So I think